Well, hello world. Welcome to the first annual Green Rights and Warrior Lawyers Virtual Academy. I'm Stephen Woods, the Director of the Center for Law and the Environment at the Allard School of Law, University of British Columbia, located on the traditional unceded and ancestral territory of the Musqueam Nation in Vancouver, Canada. In this first session of the Academy, we're greatly honored to be joined by lawyer and general counsel to the Haida Nation in what the settler colonial state of Canada calls British Columbia, Terri-Lynn Williams-Davidson. As we get underway, I would like to invite members of the audience to use the chat to introduce yourselves to us and also include the Indigenous nation on whose territory you are based, if applicable. And also I encourage you to turn on your video so that we can see one another. We like to approach this more as an interactive conversation than as a kind of a one-way webinar. And it's really lovely to see people's faces as we do that. The session is being recorded and will be available on the Academy website. Terri-Lynn's talk will be followed by commentary from Professor Calvin Sandborn of the University of Victoria, and then audience Q&A. We'll invite you to post your questions in the chat and or to speak your questions. We can use the raise hand function and unmute microphones as needed to do that. The main talk will be followed by an informal, what we call at the kitchen table chat for audience members who have signed up in advance for that. That informal conversation will take place in a different Zoom room, the link to which has been sent to registrants already in advance. I'm now going to introduce our commentator, who will in turn introduce our featured warrior lawyer. Calvin Sandborn is one of Canada's foremost public interest environmental lawyers. He's practiced for more than 25 years as counsel to the West Coast Environmental Law Association, the Farm Workers Legal Services Project, and Forest Practices Board of BC. He has extensive experience in environmental litigation and advocacy for environmental reform. He was an associate to Commissioner Stephen Owen during British Columbia's Historic Commission on Resources and Environment in the 1990s. Calvin is the legal director of the University of Victoria's Environmental Law Centre and teaches the Environmental Law Centre Clinic. In 2011, he was named an honorary citizen of the City of Victoria, British Columbia, and awarded the Andrew Thompson Award by West Coast Environmental Law, the province's top award for environmental advocacy. In 2016, he received the Victoria Bar Association's Contribution to the Law Award. In 2017, the Svetlana Kravchenko Environmental Rights Award at the Public Interest Environmental Law Conference in Eugene, Oregon. In 2018, he was appointed Queen's Counsel, and a month ago was automatically transformed into King's Counsel. Calvin, over to you to introduce Terri-Lynn.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm very honored to speak from the Lekwungen territory today at the University of Victoria, and particularly honored to introduce Terri-Lynn. Terri-Lynn is a citizen of the Haida Nation and is General Counsel to the nation. She's practiced Indigenous law, Indigenous and environmental law since 1995, when she began representing the Haida Nation at all levels of court, including the Supreme Court of Canada. She was the lead counsel in litigation to protect the old growth forests of Haida Gwaii in the Haida case, which is the leading case on consultation and accommodation of Indigenous rights. Anytime you talk in Canadian law about the right to consultation and accommodation, the Haida case is the case that you refer to first. and is referred to around the world, is known around the world as a leading global case. Terri-Lynn is counsel for the Haida Nation's Aboriginal title case and related reconciliation negotiations, which have resulted in innovative agreements with British Columbia and Canada. And I must say that those innovative co-governance agreements that have been negotiated by Terri-Lynn and the Haida Nation are the leading precedents that we point to whenever we argue for co-governance, Indigenous co-governance of land management. They are the first cases that we look to are these agreements that have been negotiated leading to the the Archipelago Management Board, but then the solutions table. That recently we did an amicus curiae to the Supreme Court of Peru, where we were arguing that the Cucama Women's Federation, an indigenous group in Peru, should have the right to govern the river and to be guardians of the river. And it was the Haida precedents that Terri-Lynn helped to negotiate that we pointed to first as the state of the art in Canada. Terri-Lynn has also been involved in important litigation involving challenging the Enbridge Northern Gateway Project and injunctive relief for herring, which is another topic that I'll talk to later on. Terri-Lynn is an Honourary Director of Ecojustice. She serves on the Law Society of British Columbia Truth and Reconciliation Advisory Committee, the Federation of Law Societies of Canada's Indigenous Advisory Council, the Dean's Advisory Committee for the Centre for Business Law at Allard School of Law at UBC, and she is co-chair of the Indigenous Engagement in Regulatory Matters Task Force. In addition, she's a co-principal investigator with the Canada Climate Law Initiative. And because of her accomplishments, Terri-Lynn has been showered with honors, including the People's Choice Andrew Thompson Award for lifetime contributions to environmental protection and sustainability. She's been awarded the Courage in Law Award from the Indigenous Law Students Association at Allard Law School. She's been named one of Canadian lawyers' top 25 most influential lawyers in the category of change makers in 2020. On Maclean's Magazine's Power List ranks her in the top 50 Canadians who are breaking ground in their field. That was a 2021 honor. And she's been recognized as one of the 500 most influential business leaders in BC in the General Counsel category. In 2021, she was appointed as Queen's Counsel, is now King's Counsel. And also, one thing I really love about Terri-Lynn is that she is a wonderful performer, artist, dancer, and author. Just blew my mind the first time I heard her perform on CBC radio, that this is a lawyer who is such a terrific artist. And I think that the connection between art and law is a really important connection and a wonderful example that Terri-Lynn presents. So I'm very happy to introduce Terri-Lynn Williams-Davidson.
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I'm coming to you from the beautiful territory of Haida Gwaii, actually my home community of Skidegate. And it's a great honor to be here with you today. I'm going to tell the story of Haida Gwaii. That's my story today. And I'll just pull up that PowerPoint. Great. So for those of you who are not aware of where Haida Gwaii is, these are the beautiful islands of Haida Gwaii, located just off the edge of British Columbia. We say we're located on the edge of the world. This is my village as it was in 1878. It shows the incredible use of old growth forests that the settlers encountered when they came to Haida Gwaii. But really, none of this story can be told then without talking about Canada's history with Indigenous peoples. This is the impact of colonization on my village of Skidegate. This is the village as I know it growing up in the 1960s. All of the beautiful longhouses and totem poles were taken down at the request of missionaries and the Indian agents. My father went to this residential school in Kokalitsa, shown on the top of the photo, and the missionaries and Indian agents asked that we not wear our ceremonial regalia. This is my great-grandmother shown in this photo in the 1800s. It's the last time they were allowed to put on ceremonial regalia. So there was a potlatch prohibition that was in place until 1951 that impacted our ability to return to our courts, the potlatch regime. My earliest passion, as Calvin mentioned, is singing. And so I started a dance group when I was 16 years old with my brother and my mother. And it was the first dance group after the potlatch prohibition. And that really is my driving passion, is Haida culture. And so in high school, I illustrated a children's book that told the story of the totem pole in front of our village that was carved by Bill Reed and raised in 1978. Every totem pole has a certain story of history about the place that it is erected. But it wasn't too long before I realized our culture would not survive because of this legal myth of terra nullius. And here in Haida Gwaii, where most of our territory is ocean spaces, mare nullius. That's a very different view than we have of our islands. The Haida name for Haida Gwaii is Haida Gwaii, or Islands of the People. We believe that our ancestors' spirit occupy the entirety of the islands and the marine spaces, as well as supernatural beings that I'll talk about a little bit later. Now, the idea of terra nullius resulted in replacing all of our tenures, if you call it that, with crown tenures. So 100%, virtually 100% of our territory was allocated by the provincial government. Only 0.16% of the lands shown here, these little yellow pinpricks, are reserves that are held by the federal government for Haida peoples. So you see none of our imprint of how we view Haida Gwaii in the changing of the landscape of Haida Gwaii. That resulted in cultural emergencies like this, the clear cutting of large areas of Haida Gwaii. This is the previous president and my cousin Gujao, shown in the middle of a clear cut, as they were in the 1980s and 1990s. Now, my work builds upon an important part of the history and the story of Haida Gwaii, which was the protection of Gwaihanas, and that's about 25% of Haida Gwaii. The elders stood on blockade lines. We called it upholding Haida law. We don't call them blockades, but they were arrested and they were willing to be in prison to protect Haida Gwaii because we realized the extent of the overcutting of the forests of Haida Gwaii. We erected a traditional longhouse in Lyle Island, shown in the bottom of the photo. And ultimately, these elders' efforts and love of Haida Gwaii resulted in the creation of Gwaihanas, shown in this photo. This is the lower portion of Haida Gwaii, 25% of the land base of Haida Gwaii. And much later, the marine area surrounding Gwaihanas has also been protected as marine protected areas. Now, Calvin talked about the TFL 39 case, and I started working on this case as an article student at what was then Sierra Legal Defense Fund, which then became Ecojustice. And so we brought the case to the Supreme Court of Canada. The Haida came with us, and we told them about the importance of the old growth forest to Haida culture, to sustaining our culture, and about our view, how we view forests in the Haida worldview. We were successful in that appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada, and we celebrated it marching down the streets of Vancouver. We hired earth spirits that walked on stilts with us to celebrate the victory and the protection of forests. And we ended that celebration in front of the Vancouver Art Gallery. And I'm shown here with a huge smile, grinning at this victory. And it was just such a great victory for us and for the Haida Nation. Unfortunately, after we won at the Supreme Court of Canada, the province of British Columbia replaced the very license that we had overturned in that litigation. And so the women of Haida Gwaii, both Haida and settlers, took to direct action in front of a log sort in Port Clements. And they were concerned about the lack of community infrastructure because of how tenures were allocated on Haida Gwaii and most of the benefits going off island and very little remaining with local communities, whether they were Haida or settler or not. We wanted to see a change in how the forests were managed. Ultimately, after many years of negotiation and other direct action and other litigation, including one that Calvin was involved with, protecting marbled murrelet, we negotiated a land use plan in 2010 that resulted in protection of about 75% of Haida Gwaii. All the protected areas are shown in green. There are 14 protected areas here outside of Gwaii that we told the Supreme Court of Canada about, but we also really advocated for stronger riparian protection. And so it looks like veins throughout Haida Gwaii. That is the protection of the riparian areas beyond what was available under the code. We also negotiated protection of stands of cedar, marbled murrelet, birds, salmon, what the then president called the birds and the bees, and taking care of that part of the ecosystems. So this is a great step. This is what I always say accommodation looks like. So the Crown will say that it's only consultation and accommodation, but actually if you really are accommodating a Haida worldview of forest, this is what it looks like. It's protection of 75% of the territory. We've protected 72% of the shorelines through the marine use planning with the province of British Columbia. And it isn't just a mere consultation, it actually is substantive protection even before we've negotiated a treaty and even before we've completed the Haida title litigation. So there are other important parts of our territory, including the marine territory, and that is why the Haida Nation intervened in the Enbridge litigation that Calvin spoke to. All of the proposed tanker routes went completely around our territory. And so we were concerned about the impact and the potential of an oil spill on the marine species and on Haida culture. And we worked with many environmental organizations and other Indigenous peoples who also intervened in that litigation and were successful in overturning that project, stopping it from proceeding. I had the great joy of working with all of these elders who gave community statements right in the communities of Skidegate and Masset, and it was so heartwarming to hear their empowerment of being willing to stand up and speak in their own words about what Haida Gwaii and the oceans mean to Haida people. We also have stopped, as Calvin mentioned, an opening of a herring fishery. When the Gwaii area was negotiated, all of the parties, the Haida and Canada, agreed that the most challenging issue that we would address is protection of herring, because it was even precarious at the time we were negotiating the Gwaii agreement. Despite that, the government of Canada, and despite their own scientists warning, open the herring fishery. And so we sought an injunction and were successful with that. And the amazing thing about that injunction is, of course, injunctions are very hard to get these days, but also the court recognized that the weight of the Haida agreements, that they required a higher than normal duty on the part of the Crown to protect Haida culture and herring species. We're currently working on a rebuilding plan, and the fishery will not be open until the herring stocks are rebuilt such that they can sustain another fishery. Now, because of terra nullius, we have to prove our rights and title to bring injunctions like this. This is all of the evidence that we filed for less than a day in court. So you can imagine that large Aboriginal title and much larger hearings require much more evidence than this. And you know, injunctions you have to pull together the evidence so quickly. So this is the evidence of the elders speaking about the importance of hearing, but also our own scientists attacking the methods that DFO used to assess the state of herring and finding faults with the methodology that they use to assess the state of the herring stocks. Now, in our work of attacking this fallacy of terra nullius and mare nullius, we've done a lot of work bringing our Aboriginal title lawsuit forward. We've commissioned evidence from 15 elders who have given beautiful testimony about the importance of all the species on Haida Gwaii, how we've used and managed Haida Gwaii's resources and Haida Gwaii itself. I don't mean to say resources, but the beings that occupy Haida territory. but also other really important laws, such as working together with others and valuing other kinds of knowledge, like scientific knowledge, the importance of that on properly managing Haida Gwaii. We also have worked for many, many years to collect Haida Gwaii place names. This shows place names overlapping each other, completely blanketing the land space. The elders have an expression that there was no land lying vacant. There was no land that was not known to the Haida people. We've used Google Earth as a platform. So if you hover over any of these icons, you'll see the translation of the Haida name, places where it has been recorded by previous anthropologists or ethnologists or other elders who've given us that name. And that's all a report in the Haida title litigation. We've also mapped our use of marine areas. The beauty of working together with Canada is that they bring their resources to look at Waihanas. And so we've created a map called the Haida Ocean Way of Life map. And we've mapped all of the different species that are important to Haida Gwaii. But we've also mapped supernatural beings, like this icon here depicts Foam Woman, who's one of the ancestress of all the Haida people who are ravens. And this is a close-up of my ancestral island of Louise Island, located within Waihanas. At the head of every creek are creek women who take care of all the salmon and trout that return. And so all of these beings are mapped in the Haida Ocean Way of Life map. We've also worked in assembling millions of documents to show our use and occupancy of Haida Gwaii. This is a screenshot of an old database. We're using a much newer one, but we've disclosed over 100,000 documents as of last month to Canada and British Columbia that are relevant to Haida title and rights. These include historical documents from all over the world. We've completed review of 1.4 million documents that came to us, electronic documents that came to us from the Council of the Haida Nation. They gave us 2.5 million documents. And so to get through all of that this year, we've been using artificial intelligence to get through all of those documents, and we'll complete disclosure of all of our relevant documents by the end of this calendar year. Yet the government of British Columbia and Canada, who also have to disprove Haida title and rights, BC has only disclosed 15,000 documents and Canada has only disclosed 56,000 documents. Now, the motivation for the Haida Nations, all of the Haida Nations work and my own personal work, are the children who are inheriting a very different world than even I did, and of course my parents and my grandparents did. They are the truest measure of sustainability and cultural sustainability. They're my personal inspiration. Some of these kids shown in here are my grandchildren, and so they really inspire me to keep doing the work that I do, both my artwork and my legal work. So to feed cultural revival, in 2008 and 9, I engaged in this large project on the edge of my desk to collect together all of the songs that have ever been recorded of Haida people, all of the archival songs here, and then to show that they're living a box set of contemporary singers singing Haida songs. Haida language is endangered. There are less than 50 people who speak that language. So it really is important to me that we keep alive these songs. So when I first sang my first Haida song at the age of 13, now children hear Haida songs in their womb. So there really has been a full circle in knowing these songs and bringing them out for the next generation. Now, I really want to I believe that this music has important messages, not only for Haida people, but the larger world. So I worked on two projects. My second album, New Journeys, is an album that pairs Haida music with classical arrangements. And my second album is one that, again, in the Haida language, containing new compositions that are paired with jazz and rock. I'm working with Bill Henderson and Claire Lawrence, who do incredible improvisational music. And so it's a great joy of mine to share this music and bring it out into the general public. And the idea is that if the Haida music is paired with something that others' ears are more accustomed to hearing, that they'll be able to understand it and be able to relate to it. Now I recorded Grizzly Bear Town, my third album, because I wanted to convey information about the supernatural beings of Haida Gwaii. Before the Supreme Court of Canada, I told them about the cedar sister and that we view cedar trees as ancient sisters, as supernatural beings in and of themselves. But there are many supernatural beings that artists have represented in their art, artists such as my husband, Robert Davidson, and many, many others. But how we viewed them realistically had not been represented. So I really wanted to write music about the supernatural beings so that people would see the supernatural beings embedded in the landscape. And so I started looking at the idea of transformation. I am a dancer with my husband's dance group, and this is my brother-in-law, Reg Davidson, dancing an eagle spirit. An eagle spirit is a being that is half human and half eagle. And in that state, they bring the powers of both beings into their presence. And our performances are about that. They're about becoming a being and transforming into that space and learning from those beings, but also bringing in the audience to understand a different worldview. In our performances, everything we wear has meaning. And so there are certain rights and privileges that we inherit or that we bring out in potlatches. And those two ideas of dress and privileges and wearing certain things and face paintings and transformation was the basis for my book, Out of Concealment, that I released in 2017. And in this book, I look at 43 different female supernatural beings. And I, because I'm a lawyer, I looked at natural law first and what, for instance, what cedar trees tell us about how to manage them, how we live with them, how they're interconnected. And then from that drew upon Haida culture and our knowledge to depict each of them. The cover illustrates White Raven as she was transforming. She's half human, half White Raven, and is just about to take the moon from the Keeper of the Light. I consciously chose to represent Raven as a female. Usually Raven is referred to as a male, but Haida culture is matrilineal and Raven doesn't have gender, and I felt it was important to embrace all expressions of gender in this book. This book was also part of a multimedia exhibit of those 43 images. And so I paired the song arrangements and the extensive research that I did in the ethnographic record and the elders' testimony. One of the images that, the first ones that I created is Cedar Sister. And so this depicts the woman who is Cedar Sister standing amongst an old growth forest stand in Haida Gwaii. And I included in the book my submissions to the Supreme Court of Canada, telling them about the importance of cedar. She's called our sister because she takes care of all of our needs from cradle to grave, our diapers, our cradles, through to memorial potlatches where we raise totem poles, such as we did last weekend. I also depict my exploration of Aboriginal and Crown title. This is an image that I've called Octopus Woman, and ghosted into the background and into every image is a two-dimensional or three-dimensional art that my husband created. He created an image called Occupied that really poked fun at the idea that we have to prove title to every square inch of our territory, but yet the Crown doesn't. And yet we can create art that completely fills the image like he did with Occupied, in the same way that we can prove title to every square inch of Haida Gwaii when called upon. Octopus are incredible creatures. They change color when they are threatened, and they become aggressive. And so Octopus Woman is shown in those colors. She represents Indigenous peoples being ready to do battle to protect our territories, and especially to protect marine spaces. But she also symbolizes the next generation, because when octopi have children, that's the beginning of the end for them. Their skin starts falling apart. They don't do anything except live under their rock and constantly tend to their eggs to ensure that they have oxygen to keep them alive. And I really think that's important for us as humans to learn that from octopus, that the next generation really should be our primary consideration. And I also looked at other contemporary images, like I call this Oil Spill Woman. And so this is right in the midst of mounting the challenge against the Enbridge Northern Gateway Pipeline Project. And one of the key areas in Haida Gwaii is Rose Spit, Toe Hill is shown in the background, and I included in images of all of the species that appear on in this area of Haida Gwaii and show them oiled. And of course, she is a supernatural phenomenon that it would be very difficult for us to deal with an oil spill in that area if it were to occur. Ghosted into the bottom is a supernatural, a story depicting Raven in the midst of a community that I don't have time to get into, but it is what I told the Federal Court of Appeal about what that story had, the importance of grounding in local Indigenous peoples and the knowledge that they have in looking at large multinational projects like the Enbridge Northern Gateway Pipeline Project. So thinking of the next generation, I released a book with my stepdaughter, Sarah Williams-Davidson, who's an educator, and we pulled out 10 of the supernatural beings and created a book, Magical Beings of Haida Gwaii. It's a bestseller. Children all over the world relate to these magical beings. And then last year we released an activity book that gets children out on the land and doing activities in the cedar forest or with rainbows or out looking at ice and frost and all of the supernatural beings that we depict in there, again, to get children out on the land and maintain their connection with Haida Gwaii and with the land around them. I also released a book that is sold out. It's an oracle deck. I wanted people to have hands-on working knowledge of these supernatural beings. And so we released, a number of us women released this deck in Vancouver a couple of years ago. We'll be re-releasing the oracle deck next year because it really has been quite popular, especially women, but people who want to learn more about Indigenous cultures and worldviews. And I wanted to come back to the ripples that this work has. And we launched the children's book in Vancouver and up here in Haida Gwaii. And the teachers that I worked with to launch the book showed some of the images up on a large screen in the primary school in Masset. And they put them up and said, "What do you see?" And this beautiful little boy, he was 6 years old. He looked at that picture, he put up his hand, and he said, "I see a sister of laws." And I just was so astounded. All of us adults were so astounded that a young boy who was 6 years old would see the cedar tree as embodying Haida laws. It was just such an incredible experience. We didn't grow up hearing about Haida laws as laws, so we really have come full circle with looking at Haida laws and the impact that it's having on the next generation. These are some of the children in Vancouver. I invited settler and Haida and people of all races to join in the launch of those books. And it was really a great day to bring out these beings again for children. It's so funny, this children's book and not the adult book has been cited in a master's thesis. So it really is very understandable for people and perhaps more understandable than the intense research that I did for Out of Concealment. Cedar Sister has also inspired my master's thesis that I completed this spring. And so I really want Haida elders to be engaged in the drawing out of Haida laws. I don't think it's only for lawyers to do, whether they're Haida or Indigenous or not. I think it's the elders' job to do that. And I didn't want to use only the case brief method. I wanted to use something that they would understand. And so I tied the laws that the Haida have articulated. These are these Haida words shown in each section. The laws embodied in the cedar tree aligned with the laws that the Haida have already articulated in their management plans with the Government of Canada and the Government of British Columbia. Both governments have recognized these laws. And so I line them up with the functions of the cedar tree using natural law. So for instance, roots intertwine throughout the forest and they connect the forest together. So those are then the laws of relationships. And so I see each of these categories as baskets that might hold Haida laws. We held a workshop last month and the elders found it much easier to relate to this than the case brief method for drawing out the laws that they heard and recognized in the oral narratives that we took them to in the workshop. So the work of working with the elders and drawing out the laws will be part of my PhD research that I've started this fall. And I'm really looking forward to working with the elders to do that work. Now, my call to action is for everyone to be an advocate for Indigenous worldviews. When the Haida Nation and the Government of Canada finally, decades later, completed the management plan for the Gwaii-Hanas area, one of the key Haida laws that infiltrates and is reflected throughout the plan is this Haida law of interconnectedness. And it's translated to English, it translates as everything depends upon everything else. And so in the management plan, we recognize that whatever we manage on the terrestrial spaces impacts the ocean spaces and vice versa. And so the whole plan was created with that filter of recognizing the need to of the impact that anything we do has on these different realms. In the Haida worldview, we see the undersea world as one realm, the land is another realm, and the air above us is another realm. And so we really work to integrate Haida laws in the management plan. And so I show this as an example to illustrate the importance of Indigenous worldviews and how it might impact our work as lawyers who work in environmental law and advancing green rights. I also have a second example, and this is an illustration that I created last year or the year before, and it depicts the Haida worldview as we see Haida Gwaii. And so I mentioned the different realms. This is the realm of Haida Gwaii, or Haida land, or Haida territory, we call it, and the undersea realm. And so we have many, many narratives where we journey down into the ocean realm and visit beings that appear like us as humans. But when they have hung near their door to their longhouses, their capes that they put on. And when they put those capes on, they appear as killer whales. So this is one of those beings, two of the beings breaching and coming into the Haida realm, appearing as killer whales once they put on their killer whale cloaks. And so in our journeys down into the undersea world, we learned many ceremonies that still are practiced today, the importance of cedar bark in our ceremonies, how we bring them out, the whistles that we use to bring out supernatural beings into our ceremonies. And this worldview is depicted in a narrative where the supernatural beings battled, not for the obligation of holding up Haida Gwaii, but for the privilege of holding up Haida Gwaii. They all wanted to hold up Haida Gwaii. And so the one who won this privilege, his name was Kuya Gagandals, and he's shown on the ocean floor. And on his chest is a pole that, and Haida Gwaii balances on that pole. And so in our worldview, whenever the martin runs up that pole, an earthquake happens. And so there are so many, our narratives are so rich with these details. But what I take from this worldview is that our overriding law is balance and sustainability. So when we go back to this articulation of Haida laws, I have allocated that law to the canopy of the cedar tree. Because when you go into old growth forest, all of the trees are filtering out the light. And so then it becomes a process of allocating the light to allow growth to happen. And so it's competition for light, but it really is about allocating the light and about sustainability. And so we learn from Kuya Gagandals that balance and sustainability really are the most important laws in the Haida worldview. And our challenge then is to draw out those laws into management plans and into the litigation and the work that we're doing as lawyers so that they have relevance to the court. Don't know why my clock is going, sorry for that. Well, maybe it's telling me that it's time to end. I've ended a little bit early here to allow room for questions. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to share this, all of these stories that make up Haida Gwaii that really are part of my DNA as a Haida woman and as a Haida person. They really are, Haida Gwaii is what drives me to do the work that I do. In the early 1980s, I journeyed throughout North America and made a commitment and made offerings to solidify my commitment to protect the earth and especially to protect Haida Gwaii. My practice is based in the Lower Mainland on the beautiful territory of Semiahmoo. And when I set up that practice there, I thought, how will I practice law here when I'm not on my home territory. And the message I got was that everything is interconnected. The land in the Lower Mainland is connected to here, and the principles are all the same. And I hope that the work that we do will have ramifications for other Indigenous peoples who are starting to draw out their laws that will benefit our protection of the earth around us. So thank you again, Hawa.
That was really wonderful. Thank you so much for such a powerful story. I'll hand over immediately to Calvin, and we anticipate your commentary.
Thank you so much, Terri-Lynn, for speaking so much truth. And the legal system has had a hard time hearing truth. And it reminds me of doing an environmental appeal board hearing in Haida Gwaii in the late 1980s. And we had witnesses that were talking about Haida truth, and we're talking about the fact that the forest company, by clear cutting the forest and then using herbicides to kill the alder and the undergrowth, were actually destroying the medicinal plants and the other plants, edible plants that were traditionally gathered. And the chairman of the Environmental Appeal Board took me aside during an intermission and admonished me for calling these witnesses, saying that this is all very interesting, Mr. Sandborn, but it's totally irrelevant. So there, at that point, there wasn't a capacity within Canadian law to hear truth and the Haida worldview. There was not an opening to that. That was 1988 or so. And about the year 2000, I was doing a hearing in Haida Gwaii, and it was about protecting marbled murrelet habitat. I think you referred to one of the cases. And we had a Ministry of Environment whistleblower who had pointed out that the government was not following its own policy of protecting old growth forests. And the government was challenging the expertise of that witness. And the witness was very nervous because his job was on the line. The company was trying to get him fired. And in the middle of that hearing, as we were qualifying this witness, your cousin, President GRAWL of the Council of Haida Nation, rose up and just spoke and said, I want to talk about the expertise of this man because we respect Alvin Kober. You may know him, Terri-Lynn. And governments had all these experts and they've seen all these species die. So they're experts presiding over the death of these species. This man we honor. And he spoke for about 15 minutes about Alvin and gave Alvin the courage to speak the truth. But in the 14 years in between those two hearings, there had been a shift where I'd been admonished for bringing somebody to bring evidence of traditional medicinal knowledge. And here, right in the middle of this hearing, GRAWL spoke for 15 minutes. And afterwards, Alvin Kober was emboldened and he spoke and he wasn't afraid anymore to speak truth to that hearing because of GRAWL's courageous statement. And then the third thing that it makes me think of is a hearing that we did where we were arguing the Forest Act and Section 32 of the Forest Practices Code and all these statutory sections. And we sent the argument to GRAWL, and he said, "Where is Cedar Sister?" You have to start this argument with Cedar Sister. And so then we did make that argument. But time and time again, Canadian legal bodies have not been open to the wisdom and the truth. And so we've seen mistake after mistake made because there was not this opening to it. And so we've seen it with wildfires, that wildfire policy was that traditional indigenous burning had to be stopped, and you had to do Smokey the Bear, and it's led to the mega fires that we're having now. There's a whole science about this. And now the government is saying, oh, we have to go back to prescribed burning, the cultural burning that was carried on for centuries. And with herring, you talked about the herring case, Terri-Lynn. That I was in Bella Bella when the Halsik elders pointed out that they had warned that when they brought in the commercial kill fishery of herring, that there would be a collapse of herring stock, and that it was only 20 years later that the Canadian officials came and apologized to the Halsik elders for not listening to the truth and not listening to the Indigenous perspective. And finally, I'd just like to say, it was such a great moment for me years ago, Terri-Lynn, doing, I think it was Forest Appeals Commission in Richmond, to see you come into the room representing the Haida Nation. And it was just, you know, we're a long way from 1954 when it was still illegal to hire a lawyer to represent an Indigenous nation on land claims. And thank God that you're there, and thank you, God, for your career. Thanks.
Calvin, thank you for those remarks. I can give Terri-Lynn an opportunity to respond if there's anything you want to say immediately, or I can open straight up to questions.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Calvin, for your kind remarks. And I have to say, I agree. We told the Supreme Court of Canada about Cedar Sister, but she's not reflected in the Haida Nation case. We told the Federal Court of Appeal about the hearing and the fact that we see them as people, and that is not reflected in the decision. And likewise, in any of what we told in Enbridge, the Enbridge decision is not there. So while we've come a long way, we still have a long way to go before the court understands what we are saying and connects the dots and reflects them in the decision. And I'm looking forward to when that will occur. I understand the decision that just came down that looks at some of that in New Zealand, and I haven't had a chance to look at that case yet, the Ellis case, so I'm excited about that possibility. The Haida word for law is kil yahda, and it means the truth, speaking the truth. So that is the goal of the elders, is advancing the truth about how we see the world. But another elder told me that it's so close. The words are so close to telling a lie. So we have to be careful in how we advance the truth and what the court might say in reflecting Haida law in their decisions and Indigenous laws. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to open up to questions from the audience. So please don't be shy. Use the raise hand feature, which should be under reactions, I believe. Yeah, if you click on the reactions button in your Zoom toolbar, one of the choices is raise your hand. And we will take questions from audience members. It's like that moment when I'm teaching a class, when I ask students for input. You have to be patient. And we have a volunteer, Paula. Welcome. See if you can unmute yourself. If not, we'll help you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stefan, Terry, Calvin, and everyone. It's very nice to be here and to listen. Terry's background experience is really powerful, no? As someone said in the chat, and inspire a lot of work for all of us, I guess, that we are working somehow with Indigenous people. I'm from Bolivia. I'm a lawyer and researcher from Bolivia. And although I'm not specifically working in a community as I would like, somehow my research also is related to Indigenous in terms of the rights of nature, especially in Bolivia and in Latin American context. So in addition to say thanks, Terry, for all your work that you are doing, that is a real inspiration for all of us. I would be interested to know, as far as I know, there is not a recognition of rights of nature in Canada per se, but as you explained here, terribly, there is the connection between the Indigenous and nature that has been stressed in the cases and also in the other experience that you have with the community, with all the members. So could you please go a bit to remark this relation and how this has been bringing the cases, even there is not a legal or proper recognition in law?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. In Canada, Aboriginal rights are protected under Canada's Constitution under Section 35. So that has often been the handle for us to advance our cases, is to ensure protection of Aboriginal rights. And we can't exercise those rights without the environment. And so that is usually how we advance protection of the environment, through Section 35 and Aboriginal rights. So in that way, we've had stronger rights than others who are trying to bring environmental cases, in that there isn't, as you say, that absence to rights of nature. But when I think about rights of nature, I want us to do a little conceptual shift in that this whole legal system is based on rights. And so developers receive a right that becomes almost a super right. That, it might have once been a profit of Prandra, but now it's a full-fledged right. There's a logging company suing both the government of British Columbia and the Haida for protecting areas that resulted in loss to their logging rights. So it's interesting for us to be paired with the government of British Columbia to justify the creation of protected areas. But all to say that these rights that were initially just a right to make money has now become a much stronger right. And I think that the problem is in viewing these as rights and things that are sort of guaranteed and protected. But if we look at it from an Indigenous worldview or a Haida worldview, we don't have rights, we have responsibilities. I don't have a right to the island that I showed of Louise Island, the Skidans people's territory, but I have a responsibility to protect it and ensure it's there for future generations. And I think we need to look at responsibilities to nature instead of rights of nature, because as soon as people think they have a right, then it seems to be too much power that results in misuse of that right. So that's my own view. That's how I'd look at rights to nature. Our work really is protecting Aboriginal rights because it's the only avenue we have, even though we might not view them as rights. They really are something that should be protected in Canada, and that's really the basis of our work. Calvin, I'm sure, or Stephan, you might have other things to contribute to that as well.
I have a, yeah, that kind of blows my mind, your comment there, Terri-Lynn, because are you saying then that it's more a relationship of reciprocity than of one person having a right? I'm just kind of trying to understand this. I read Braiding Sweetgrass last year, and it kind of really opened up my eyes to the idea of reciprocity, because Western lawyers are really focused on rights, and it is kind of a very capitalistic kind of view of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Amazing.
it is about reciprocity, but it's more than, it's at a deeper level than that. For instance, my Haida name is Girafgutsli, and I don't have that as a right, but it's a privilege that I hold. And so maybe instead of rights, we should be thinking of a privilege, that you have a privilege. I have a privilege of holding that name, but if I conducted myself improperly, my clan could take that name from me. In the same way that if I was disrespectful to Louise Island, I would no longer have the privilege of being tied to that part of the world because I haven't upheld my responsibilities to take care of that place.
Yeah, I think it's a really important discussion to have and a question to think about, the relationship between the sort of rights movement and the revitalization of Indigenous legal orders, and even sort of transformation of the state legal orders. One of the appeals of the idea of rights for nature is that it provides a powerful counterpoint to the rights-based extractive economy or extractive legal regime, where basically, you know, we're operating within a framework within which certain actors have these legally protected rights, and in order to sort of counterbalance those, there's an appeal to use the concept of rights sort of on the other side. But yeah, it's a rather one-dimensional way of looking at those relationships. And the way I like to think about it is that you know, it's just one possible aspect of a larger kind of you know, a larger effort to provide legal recognition for the non-human or more than human relatives with whom we share the world, and that would include the land and the supernatural beings and the animals and species and the water. And so, yeah, I think of it also more in terms of figuring out legal ways to operationalize concepts of interrelationship, interconnectedness, responsibility, and reciprocity. And I really like your remark about thinking of privileges rather than rights, because I think that even the idea of privileges has a very sort of strong roots in Western legal culture. So it's something that you know, people in settler society or settler legal systems could immediately understand and relate to as a way of reframing, reframing that conversation. Another question or comment? We can take at least one more, I would say, but we can also close a little bit early.
I actually have, I have a response here, Stefan. So Aldo Leopold, the founder of Wildlife Biology, spoke about how he saw it as a progression of rights, and compared it. He talked about how Black people in the United States did not have rights as slaves, and then they were recognized as having rights and being members of the community. Women did not have rights to vote until 1920 or whatever, and that they were part of the community. And he felt that the natural progression should be to take on something more like an Indigenous worldview of recognizing the world as a community, and the natural world as a community, to have rights. So that was a very Eurocentric person looking at that concept. But you know, it does strike me that perhaps the key thing could be more of a sense of community. The other person I think of is Martin Luther King, who talked about the beloved community and seeing the inclusiveness. And anyway, those are just some responses.
Part of the inspiration for the Haida to work with settler communities and to reach consensus on the land use plan was the recognition that we're all people, and that is the commonality between us. Is we've made our home here, our children are growing up together, and it was really important for us to find a solution, but also recognizing our word for all people always has the word people in it. And so the work in Gwaii was about finding the commonalities. So our work is always about finding what do we have in common and then building on that strength from there. And I think that's important to remember.
Well, those are good words of wisdom to close on, I would say. So in closing, before I ask everybody to join me in thanking both Terri-Lynn and Calvin, I want to mention that our next session in the Green Rights and Warrior Lawyers Virtual Academy will begin in around 3 hours. It is featuring Justice Brian Preston, the Chief Judge of the New South Wales Land and Environment Court. He'll be joining from Sydney, Australia, where it will already be Wednesday. He's the Chief Justice or Chief Judge of one of the world's most progressive and innovative environmental courts. So it will be amazing to hear his story. It's not too late to register for that session if you have the time and inclination by going to the event website, which you already must know if you managed to find your way to this session. Just also a reminder that that session will be recorded, as are all of these sessions. So that's one invitation. Another invitation, if you are currently a university student, undergraduate or postgraduate, we want to extend an invitation to check out the Inspirathon event that we have organized following the Academy. It's a sort of a research-a-thon, a kind of a hackathon, where teams of university students from anywhere in the world can sign up to do some research and brainstorming. And Emma has just put a link in the chat to where to learn more. Research and brainstorming on how to convert the world's unsustainably exploited exclusive economic zones into sustainably stewarded, enlightened ecosystem zones. A topic that actually would be close to Terri-Lynn's heart, since so much of the marine areas of Haida Gwaii are also, in fact, probably all, are claimed by the state of Canada as part of its exclusive economic zone. That Inspirathon challenge is actually brought to us by the Philippine lawyer Tony Opoza, who's going to be one of the featured speakers in the Academy when it reconvenes in November 9th and 10th. The last thing I will say is that we are going to take a short 5-minute break, and then the folks who have signed up for the informal chat around the kitchen table, the virtual kitchen table, so that will reconvene in 5 minutes at a separate Zoom link that has already been sent to those who signed up. And that opportunity is available after all of these talks that we're having. So if you're interested in that opportunity to have an informal, more intimate chat with the warrior lawyers who we are so privileged to hear from, you can do that opportunity on the website. So with that, please join me. You can use your reactions buttons to do the little clappy hands, or you can unmute yourself and clap. Join me in thanking Terri-Lynn Williams-Davidson for such a wonderful, inspiring talk. And our assistant will now draw us to a close technically.